Well, hello, my theosophical buddies. This is Jeff coming to you from the foothills again, and I'm happy to have a chance to be with you. It looks like everything is working, and sorry about last week. We had a little bit of technical difficulty that knocked us off the air, and I apologize to those of you who showed up for nothing. But I hope some of you are back here tonight, and I'm able to give you this talk that I had in mind then. So, what I want to get into tonight is an extension of a topic we've addressed here a number of times. So, we tend to be interested in questions of consciousness and spirit and the overarching search for the meaning of the I am, and how far down or up does this I am quality, the existence, self-awareness, go? And so, in modern science, a wonderful thing that's happening is that studies of consciousness, the origins of it, whatever it is, how it works, is now very much in vogue. It's been a great change to watch. Over the last 30, 35 years, there's been a sea change in the acceptability, in fact, prevalence of this as a scientific topic of research, which is great. So, what I want to do now is I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about bees and fish and whales. I'm going to start with a story that's interesting about bees, the bumblebees. So it's called Bombus terrestris. That happens to be the Latin name of bumblebees. And I like this story. It's a recent one, and it illustrates some interesting elements of the scientific method, which are kind of cool just to have laid out for you. So something people knew about, this has been long observed element of bumblebee behavior, which is that if you give them sugar water to taste, they seem to want it. And after they taste the sugar water, there comes a period of time where they just stick their tongue in and out. It's called tongue protrusion behavior. If you give them salt water or something bitter, uh, they don't really want it. And after they taste it, they have a tendency to wipe their mouth and shake their head. And so animal or insect behaviorists sort of came to a question on this observation, or based on it, which is, are these robotic responses just kind of reflexes, no particular meaning, or are these reflections of a more complex inner state in these bumblebees? And bumblebees are really cute. You kind of want to think of them as being conscious, as long as they're not mad at you. They're really cute little creatures. I get to watch them all the time here in the foothills because we have lavender plants, and they show up by the thousands, and they really like lavender. Although I never noticed the tongue thing after they ate lavender, but maybe it's there, and I just didn't see it. Well, so scientists decided to do some experiments. Experiment number one, kind of interesting. Sounds a little mean, but it's not, I don't think, that bad. What they would do is they would take some bumblebees and heat them at 40 degrees centigrade for a little while and induce some state of dehydration. Not killing them, not torturing them, just drying them out. And then offer them liquids. And what they discovered was that the bumblebees who previously wanted nothing to do with salt water or saltish water, if you offered them salty, not terrible, not toxically, but just enough to notice water, after you had dehydrated them, they did the same kind of tongue protruding, maybe a happy dance kind of behavior that they did with sugar water before. And so this was an interesting change in behavior that seem to be state dependent. Are they eliciting this enjoyment tell, is the way they phrased it in the paper. Uh, because of this interstate change, what is this saying about the complexity of their interstate? And you can certainly relate to that as a human, right? Water tastes a lot better when you're really thirsty than otherwise. Well, led them to do some more experiments. So experiment number two, they took the same bees and they dosed them up with dopamine, which is a motivational reward neurochemical. And so typically you dose animals with dopamine, they will engage in more of whatever behavior they were going to do. They're more motivated to get busy and go do things like seek food if you amp up their dopamine circuitry a little bit. And they did that with the bees, and behavioral changes, yeah, but no change in this hypothesized enjoyment tell. If they tasted sweet or salty or whatever, they went out and saw it, but they didn't seem to change their possibly subjective experience based on a dopamine high. Well, experiment number three, sort of the most amusing one, they dosed these bees up with endocannabinoids, meaning they got these bees stoned. And we know that in people, or in mammals in general, this has a certain well-known effect of enhancing enjoyment of food. The whole ice cream-o-taxis thing that happens when humans are on that, they tend to go find ice cream or some other food that they know they like. Well, in this case, you get these bees a little high, and what they observed was the tongue out happy tell was coming a lot. It became prevalent and even more generalized. So that was pretty cool. I can see some issues, some leaps. There's still a lot to do here. This is a pilot study. They're just beginning, but it's at least consistent with the notion that bees, well, bumblebees at least, and other bees too. I've read more about bees in general. This is not completely unique to bumblebees, but the bees do seem to have something like an internal subjective experience. Now, that may not be much of a surprise to you and me. We've seen angry bees, we've seen placid bees. Of course they have an intersubjective experience, but it's been an open question to science, okay? So scientists have to go off of sort of reproducible stuff you can write in a notebook and ascribe numbers to and hand it to somebody else, and they're going to find about the same thing. And so an intuitive feeling that, yeah, of course bees have a subjective inner state of awareness doesn't really quite cut it in terms of establishing scientific facts and tracing this notion of the I am up and down the evolutionary ladder. So great experiment. I loved this. I was really glad, and it sort of establishes that these bees are not just robotic little entities running a program. This happened to have been published in the July 15th issue of that new Scientist magazine that I've drawn a lot of articles for you from. Okay, so that's kind of like point number one. Number two, I wanted to come back a little bit to a follow-up on a talk that I gave to you guys about 4 years ago about an interesting fish. And this is an African fish. It's called the Mormarus rume proboscis, which is the long, hard-to-say Latin version of elephant fish, that tends to live in murky-ish waters in various parts of Africa. And what was discovered about this fish was that it had an even bigger brain size to body weight ratio than humans, and it is giving off these interestingly complex pulse trains of weak but nonetheless very detectable electric impulses, and they give them to each other. And what was discovered even back then, and the last time I spoke, was that the the way these pulses worked, it seemed like the fish would talk for a little while. There'd be a pause, and another fish would do it, and then the pause, and another fish would do it, and it had the statistics, at least the look of words being exchanged, or information signals at least being exchanged between individuals, similar to the rhythm, at least, of human speech. And so I decided to just go back and take a look at that and see what has been discovered since then. Um, and there's been confirmatory studies that would agree with the general notion that these signals seem to be informing about the fish's inner state. There's something being communicated about either the environment and or their hormonal state, and it's a back and forth chatter that's taking place. But they most of the research since this was originally discovered seems to have gone into the electrophysiology of the pulse train generation and reception, all the way down to molecular details of the ion channels involved, and very cool stuff having to do with the neurological basis of it all. It seems to be coming from the fish's cerebellum, which in humans has to do with fine motor control, certain elements of cognition, but not mostly. It's more of a motor function part of the brain. It has a big fraction. I think more than half of the neurons in the brain are in the cerebellar structure. But so these fish had a big hypertrophied cerebellum, and that's has a huge energy demand, and so they're working really hard to sustain this apparatus. What's been discovered is that it seems to be particularly valuable to the fish in terms of group cooperative cohesion and hunting behavior, even of stalking and signaling the presence of prey type fish. They feed on smaller African fish, the kind that you see in pet stores called cichlids. And one of the things, though, that they're going to keep moving with this. So let's call this a stay tuned kind of thing. We don't. I didn't find much in the way of trying to decipher or decode or understand more deeply the information content of these signals that seem to be going back and forth in a very coordinated fashion. But I suspect it's there, and maybe 3 years from now I'll be back to you with the first elephant fish sonnets that we've been able to decipher. So changing gears a little bit now, I'll go into kind of the larger of these topics, which is the progress that's been made in trying to understand the very complex vocalizations that we have known for a long time are coming from cetaceans, meaning dolphins and whales and killer whales and that whole group of organisms. So we've known for a long time that dolphins had something going on. There are clear signs of advanced cognition and intelligence in their behavior, at least up there with dogs, maybe more. And people had quite a while ago been recording and analyzing the statistical nature of their clicks and whistles that the dolphins make, and they discovered a statistical regularity in that body of recordings of something called the Zipf law. Zipf's law is it's a statistical observation that applies to signal bearing or meaning bearing trains of characters, and it could be sounds, words, could be whatever. The gist of it is that some words, like say in a human language, say we're looking at a language, the word the will appear very frequently. And then there will be a sequence downward, so the word almost as often. Then words like on less often. And then a more meaning conveying word like under comes less than that. And there's a you can draw a line between a statistical frequency of observation and the complexity and presumably meaning content of that sound or representation in whatever this body of data is that we're trying to analyze. And so this statistical similarity between dolphin sounds and human language has been established. Well, that's proceeded, and now there have been people who've been able to make dolphin keyboards, and there's even an app that runs on a Pixel phone that will allow you to establish a vocabulary, a common vocabulary, and communicate with dolphins. Now, that's not the same thing as having translated their language. We aren't there yet, but we're getting close. If you think back to like 35 years ago, even, there was the famous, I'm trying to remember if it was a chimpanzee or a gorilla. There have been examples of both, who at first were taught how to do sign language, and then another one, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the names, but was taught how to use a keyboard. And we sort of quickly discovered, after we established a way to get information in and out, whether sign language or a keyboard, that those animals were capable of understanding words. They could construct rudimentary sentences. They would come up with novel names for things that made sense. Those animals clearly have a level of cognition significantly higher than that of dogs, and probably not where we are, but not as different as a lot of people might have hoped. So there's clearly a continuum of cognitive sophistication and awareness amongst us primates. Well, that's been extended now. And so next thing I would bring up in this vein would be observations of the songs that come from humpback whales. So humpback whales are a baleen whale. You know, they have a big, complicated filter kind of tongue, and they swim along, and they gulp in big amounts of water, which at least hopefully some of the time have lots of bait fish or shrimp or krill, and that's where they get their food source from. But it's been long known that they have these beautiful, ornate, complicated songs. And so there's been quite a study of them over the years, and people have long known that these songs are different from pod to pod and region to region within the ocean, and that in some cases we can see changes in those languages, and one pod can learn how to sing like the other pod. So it was clear that there was some complicated stuff going on with the humpback whales. Well, statisticians brought artificial intelligence type statistical and analytical tools to what was about 8 years of very high fidelity recordings of humpback whale vocalizations, and they were able to discover not only the statistics of high information content in the humpback whale songs, but they were also able to observe in time how the sophistication and Zipf law plots of the whale songs would change as baby humpback whales first start babbling and then start imitating the song structure and phonemes and patterns of their parent pod, and then slowly asymptote and become like that of the adults. And so they were able to show a strong resemblance between that statistical pattern of development that we have very well measured and understood in the way human infants acquire language and the way these humpback whales were acquiring their songs. Now, the last article I could find about this is still kind of classically reserved and cautious science lingo. So the people doing this work, they're not yet quite willing to come out and call these songs a language. And what they're saying is that they can't quite be sure at this point if there is semantic meaning and information being conveyed in these vocalizations, or is it more emotional and more akin to human musical expression, which can also be very complex and convey meanings about inner states and such. Um, I my guess would be that over time, that people will probably come out and discover that there's at least some degree of semantic meaning in these sounds, and it's not just making up random stuff about how they're feeling at the moment that happens to analyze similar to human speech. But that's another to be seen and stay tuned kind of situation for the humpbacks. So then the most alive and interesting area of research that I've been able to discover here started becoming clear a while back. So early work, like years and years ago, people studying sperm whales. Now, sperm whale is a very different kind of whale, right? It's got a lot of teeth, and they hunt cooperatively. They are the biggest brained creature out there. Bodily, they're not quite as big as blue whales, but they're big, and have a very complicated matrilineal social structure. And it had been observed for a long time that they speak in cliques and trains of cliques that can be very loud and can travel a long way in the ocean. It was figured out that the different matrilineal clans, even in a certain part of the ocean, would have quite distinct and different patterns of these cliques. But it was also observed that if two clans of these sperm whales came into near contact, what would arise would be a hybrid style of this click pattern business. And it started to look like a hybrid tongue, or a perhaps mutually intelligible new style of communication was coming into being at the borders of clan territories. So that's been around for a while. Then starting in 2024, the evidence began getting really rich, because once again, people were able to bring modern and AI empowered statistical analyses to pre-existing many years of high fidelity recordings that marine biologists had been amassing and archiving. And that's perfect, all right? So these large language models that are the basis of our current generation of AI, that's their gig, is pattern recognition at a level that is hard to do using statistical tools that we've been using up until not that long ago. They can take it to many higher dimensional spaces, and they can look for patterns that would be difficult to sort out otherwise. And so AI was turned loose on the recordings of sperm whale cliques and trains of cliques. And what was quickly discovered was they had the structure of a phonetic alphabet, in the sense that there are small repeated patterns of cliques. Some of them have now been demonstrated to occur with something like a tonal differentiation. There's like 4 different styles of tonal variation, similar to the Chinese language, where you can have a word like ma or ma. You can have, up, flat, or down intonation changes as something is pronounced. So the statistical similarity is just off the charts between what a human language looks like statistically and what these sperm whales are able to do. the combinatorial complexity of these short bytes, the way they're being interchanged, combined, swapped, exchanged between individuals, just pencils out like a human language when it's analyzed statistically. Now, since then, we've been able to distinguish these vowels, the tonal patterns. One hugely helpful event happened, and it was described in a paper in 2025 around the event of the birthing of a sperm whale calf. Because what happened, and this could be observed from the air and from people with cameras in the water and by recording, so a very rich data collection environment. 6 or 8 unrelated adult sperm whales came together and helped the mother sperm whale to give birth to its calf, and then cooperated in being the ones to gently get this calf to the surface so that it could take its first breath of air at the surface of the water. So I think the full richness of that whole interaction is still being decoded and learned from. But obviously, that's a wonderful type of data set to have to work with, because of the multi-modalities and the multiple perspectives that the scientists were able to bring to bear on that event. So stay tuned on that one. We're not yet decoding sperm whale language, but I gotta believe we're going to get there. I think, who knows how long it'll take, and who knows how rich and or interesting the information content is. It's clearly going to have a lot to do with interstates and coordination of activity type strategies. There will be something very close to a language there. Will it have a rich level of meaning the way human language does? That's going to remain, but you can certainly let your mind run and imagine. So here's something to appreciate. These sperm whales are part of the cetaceans. Cetaceans started off as land animals who, between a span of years of like about 56 and 35 million years ago, began returning to the water in waves and learning how to reacclimate to an aquatic environment. There are skeletal remains of sperm whales that are identifiably sperm whales from as long ago as 35 million years. And you can tell that from their jaw and the nature of the fact that they have all these teeth. So we know they were pretty well formed, and they were in something close to a finalized form, although there were different ones. So for example, back that long ago, some of the sperm whales were occupying an ecological niche similar to that of killer whales now, and they were actually predators on other whales. That's not how we observe it today. I think there's only one kind of sperm whale, and they pretty much have a diet exclusive to deep sea squid. So no threat from the sperm whales. But what's interesting to think about is the timing of that. So they've had this structure. They've had the vocal structure to produce, and the spermaceti organ in their head, it seems to be about helping to receive these clicks over long distances. I think both produce and receive. So that the sperm whale organ that we sadly hunted them almost to extinction to get is related to this extraordinary capacity that we're now studying. 35 million years, that's a long time. They've had 35 million years to refine their language and perspective and come into harmony with their environment. And who knows? So they have great big eyes, right? They roll up on their side and look at the sky. There's a bunch of lights up there and stuff. Are they talking about it? We don't know, but maybe we'll find out soon enough. Humans, just by way of contrast, you might ask the question, well, When did humans first start talking? Or can we know? That's an open question, okay? But we can say this, that um, two of the very early members of the Homo genus, one was called Homo habilis, has now been established to have been around and functioning and using tools and having at least fossil indications of the capacity for language for about 2 million years. There's another contender for the title of first human would be Homo ergaster. Homo ergaster, tool using evidence of Broca's area in the brain case. So there's a way to analyze the fossils of ancient humans in terms of the structure of their spine, from which you can infer things about the structure of their throat. And especially if you get a fragment of jawbone or brain case, you can actually infer quite a bit about the probability of their capacity for speech. And so we think Homo habilis and Homo ergaster probably had speech. They for sure used tools. Well, okay, call it 2 million years. That means the whales have a 33 million year head start on us in terms of evolving their language and arguably their culture. Uh, that's that's a factor of about 18 times as long as we have been doing that. So I'd say there's reasonable uh, reason to think they might have something pretty serious going on. And once we get that we can talk with them, we might have some things to learn. I certainly hope so. I think we probably just look at the kind of stuff humanity's involved in doing with its time and energy right now. It would be good to have a big brother to talk to. Um, a big brother who doesn't put most of his energy into killing each other. I mean, yeah. So something to look forward to. And it's been a pleasure to be with you folks tonight. So, Jeff from the mountains dialing out, and I'll look forward to seeing you again in a few months. Good night.